So let's begin. So he was born in 1724 and died in 1804. What's important about that is that it's the 18th century basically. And when I say 18th century, what do you normally think of? Enlightenment, right?
Yeah.
That's the age of enlightenment. That's like the peak of enlightenment. And every philosopher reacts to his age. Like, I don't know, for example, Kierkegaard saw everyone went to the church, but they were like a crowd that followed the priest and they had no idea what they were doing. So Kierkegaard basically started criticizing the crowd. So that was his reaction to his age. For Kant, it's the same. He's somehow reacting to his age of enlightenment. And that's the nature of his philosophy, a reaction to enlightenment. When we say enlightenment, we think of scientific revolutions and liberalism and all the good stuff like that. Yeah, and it's by the way, it's very interesting that when Newton died, Kant was born. Like Newton died a couple of years after Kant was born. So it's a continuation of the Newtonian revolution. So it's very important the presence of Newton in the age of enlightenment. Why? Well, when you say enlightenment and scientific revolutions, you think of good things like progress, industrial societies, and stuff like that. But this comes at a price because this is around the time that people do not need God anymore. Before Newton, if you were an atheist, you didn't have any good reasons why to deny God. Like you couldn't explain it. Like if somebody pushed you, said, I don't know, I believe in causality, but how would you explain causality? Like you don't believe in free will. Look, you say God doesn't exist, there is no free will and stuff like that. Everything was created and it's all based on causality. But how would you explain it? Newton made that possible. So that's the dark side of enlightenment for people who were concerned, like Kant, who was very concerned that does these scientific revolutions mean that we don't need God and religion anymore? And Kant's answer was no, we can make room for God, and I will later explain how Kant did it. For now, let's remember that the optimism of the age of enlightenment is its progress, and the pessimism that comes into being is due to materialism and skepticism. Skepticism didn't start with Kant, and if you think about like Descartes, he was a skeptic. Do you remember his meditations? He was basically trying to build a foundation upon which he could build his own philosophy. And he said that, okay, let's think about everything that we know. And the thing about it is that we can always doubt, right? That's what Descartes said. Like if I see a book in front of me, I could doubt and say, oh, maybe I'm imagining this book. Maybe it's not really there. So skepticism had already started earlier with Descartes like that, and this is a methodological skepticism. You use it so you could build something out of it. You're not being a skeptic for the sake of being a skeptic. But then it becomes even more radical in Hume, because Hume was skeptic about every truth that was beyond science. Like he was really skeptical about metaphysical claims about truth, right? Why is this important? It's important because, again, it's also the age of Newton for Hume, and he also believes in science. And I have a quotation here from Hume which says, a miracle, he didn't also believe, I should add this, that he didn't believe in miracles, and this is like one of the ways he explained it, that a miracle is a violation of the laws of nature. So there cannot be any miracles because it's above nature. And also you could explain it like this: if something happens and it's in nature, it cannot be really a miracle because it happened in nature. So that's kind of a skepticism about miracles. What Kant wants to do is that he wants to take people like Descartes, who belong to the rationalist tradition, and synthesize their ideas with what people like Hume thought, the empirical school of thinking, right? So what is rationalism? This is like really basic. These are the basics that you know, but I'm just going to briefly repeat it. For Descartes, for someone like Descartes, ideas had to be clear and distinct. Like those were the best ideas, and he called them the mark of truth. If you have like ideas which are clear and distinct, then you have a foundation upon which then you can build your whole philosophy and be completely sure about its validity. So you can be sure that it's true. So for Descartes, mathematical knowledge is something which is clear and distinct, right? And he thought that such ideas are innate, which means that you can find it in yourselves, and you don't have to, in yourself, and you don't have to do anything. You basically just sit back and think about philosophy, and then you come across these ideas. And or imagine Spinoza and his book Ethics. What Spinoza did was even more radical than any other rationalist, because in his Ethics he took some definitions, some very simple definitions that everybody at the time believed in. Like nobody would disagree with these definitions, and he said these are my axioms. And what he did was he made a axiomatic philosophy out of these basic axioms, meaning like his philosophy is like geometry. So this is like the very peak of rationalism. That you can just sit back and imagine how the whole universe works based on deductive reasoning and your ratio, your reason. On the other hand, you have like you have the empirical school, people who were empiricists, like Bacon, who were far from the rationalists. Like for Bacon, people are not tabula rasa. Bacon said that our minds are like crooked mirror. The human mind is like a crooked mirror. So basically, whatever it perceives, it bends them and makes them become out of shape. In his whole life, he tried to combat the crooked mirror of the mind. And do you remember his idols? Do you remember his? Have you heard about them? Like the idols of the mind? Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. Yeah.
I don't know how the names.
Like the idol of the theater, idol of the market. Yeah, yeah. So that's the thing he wanted to do. He wanted to really overcome these idols, and he established the scientific method. And what is very important about the scientific method is that it is inductive, so it's not deductive. And in Hume, induction it becomes even more radical, because Hume says that Hume says that induction is all that we have, right? Induction is all that we have, and we cannot hope for anything better, and we have to deal with it. And what Hume wanted to do was that he wanted to do what Newton did. Newton basically came up with some laws that explained the whole universe. They were just simple laws of mechanics that sufficed to explain how matter moves, right? Hume wanted to do the same thing, but for the human mind. He wanted to say how the human mind works based on some simple laws. And this is very important for Kant, because Kant wants to do the same thing. So what does Kant do with all of this? Kant wants to take rationalism and synthesize it with empiricism. So he wants to use them as complementary systems. Early Kant, when he was very young, he thought that our knowledge of the world was a priori knowledge. And you could just sit back and, like Descartes, think about the universe and come up with stuff. So our knowledge of the world for him initially was not dependent on the senses. But as he matured, he formed some doubts. He said, okay, wait a minute. The only we can talk about the world is through experience, right? And then that would mean we would have no a priori knowledge. So this was a contradiction for him. Also, if knowledge were completely a priori and we didn't need our senses, then something bad would happen. Like for example, if you remember Descartes, he said, "What if experiencing is not real and some demon put it in my head?" So if you don't have any senses, how are you gonna fact check what you're coming up with? It might be just a figment of your imagination or something. Kant started having these kinds of doubt. Finally, he had an insight which basically revolutionized his whole philosophy. And this insight was that we process sensory information by the a priori forms of our cognitive faculties, right? So we have cognitive faculties. We take information, sensory information as an input. And thanks to these cognitive faculties, we come up with experiences. This is basically a shift in perspective, because before that, Kant thought that, and everybody else before Kant, they thought that we have our mind, and our mind has somehow to conform to the object that it sees to perceive it and see how it and experience it. But Kant said, wait a minute, maybe we're looking at this from the wrong perspective. So he said, maybe it's the other way. Maybe it is the object which is conforming to our mind. And that's how we are experiencing it. The important thing to remember is that our minds have the laws of nature within it. So we basically, nature is working the way it is working because our mind is telling us that's how it should be working. You have all the laws of nature in your mind. Human understanding becomes the source of the laws of nature, right? That was the case for Kant. Human understanding becomes the source of the laws of nature. And the laws of nature exist in our head. Also, something else is important, that when you receive this sensory information, the structure of your cognitive faculty does not change. Like, it's a priori, it's given, it does not change based on the information that you receive. Kant's views on our cognitive faculties is what distinguishes him from all the philosophers that came before him. Because for rationalists, you only have the faculty of reason, or for empiricists, you have the faculty of perception. Like, there is only one cognitive faculty. But in Kant's system, you have the faculty of understanding, which is called Verstand, and it deals with concepts. And you've got the faculty of sensibility, and it deals with the senses. It's a complementary system in that way. You can also compare it with rationalists who believed that the mind contains both the structure and the content of our knowledge, right? But for Kant, the content is not in the mind anymore. It doesn't have to be. You can receive it like sensory information.
I'm lost here.
Like rationalists, this is the point about them. You can sit back and then you can think about the universe. And if you come up with something, you didn't have to be in contact with the universe, right? You didn't have to have any sensory information from the physical universe, which implies that whatever you come up with it should be already in your head. So the content of knowledge would already be in your head. But if you are following Kant, then you can say that no, I have the faculty of reason, and I have the faculty of understanding, but I can also have like sensory information from the outside world, right? And I can work with this to come up with experience. And his famous book is Critic of Pure Reason. And what he wants to do in that book is that he wants to use reason to talk about reason itself, which is like really bizarre. He's using reason as a means to talk about reason itself. And in this book, he's trying to answer one very important question, and it's the possibility of metaphysics. He wants to know if metaphysics is possible. Remember how Hume, for example, rejected philosophical metaphysical claims, right? Kant wants to ask if metaphysics is possible, and he finds that it is possible in a sense, and it is only possible in the sense that the world conforms to the laws that correspond to our faculties, right? If you want to come up with metaphysics, any metaphysical system, it should be based on this insight. And metaphysics for him is a priori knowledge, like reason just working independently of experience. That's for him. That's how metaphysics should be conceived. The a priori concepts that our understanding uses to form experience are called categories. Like you need these categories to come up with experiences. These categories are objectively valid. Like you can apply them to all the objects and talk about objects. And we can experience thanks to these categories. But this is very important for Kant and for his philosophy, and why he's an influential figure for idealism. And it's that we experience thanks to these faculties, but we are also self-conscious because of them. So we have our cognitive faculties, and we have our categories, and thanks to these categories, we can become self-conscious. And I will explain how self-consciousness works. Self-consciousness for Kant is basically the awareness of the mind's activity of synthesizing sensory input to form experience. Right? That's one of the reasons why he needed to synthesize rationalism with empiricism. So he could explain self-consciousness and say how self-consciousness works. And you also need self-consciousness to explain this synthesis. So self-consciousness, it requires subject-object distinction. When you are self-conscious, you can distinguish between yourself and a book or a chair or the world around you. So that's the important thing about consciousness. And you do that, you make this distinction between yourself and the world around you through judgment. And this is another important word in Kant, judgment. And judgment are basically objective claims that distinguish between what is objective from what is subjective. That which is objective holds universally for everyone, right? So if I'm thinking about something which is objective, you should have the same understanding of it as I do. For example, I have this book in front of me. Now, I have certain memories that when I see this book, I'm reminded of them. I should know that those memories are subjective because you will not have those memories. So that's how self-consciousness works. And that's how judgments work. They allow you to tell you that things like memories or feelings, they're the subjective parts. Not everybody else will have them. And things like, I don't know, mathematical concepts, they're objective because everybody else will have them. So we are basically self-conscious because we judge. And categories are a priori rules for judging. And Kant's judgments are a priori rules for judging, but and they were basically logical forms of propositions, right? But they're not simply logical functions. They do more than that. There are rules. Like, for example, let's just go through a couple of them. Like, you have quantity of judgments, which is like unity, plurality, and totality. Or you have quality of judgments, like reality, negation, limitation, or relation of judgments, or the modality of judgments.
Yeah, I think that I've never really understood it.
I will explain what each of them means.
Just
like
let me see one thing here, because I think I have like a nice. Yeah, it's not readable.
I think it is that, yeah. So when you say universal judgments, it's like let me just show you how. If you look at that, like there are four of them, like there are four groups, and each group they have like three. Yeah, there are like three in there. And for example, one of them says universality or something like that, or unity, plurality, stuff like that, right? And when you say basically universal judgments, for example, like one of them, it means that it's a rule which says all A's are B's, like all cats are carnivores, right? Or when you have like particular judgments, it means like some A's are B's, or singular judgment means like this A is a B, like that. Or you have like affirmative judgments, which means it is the case that A's are B's. Or you have negative judgments, which means that no A's are B's. Or you have infinite judgments, which is like A's are non B's. Like these are rules that you can use as your guide, as your logical function, right? So there are rules and there are also logical functions. I can give this paper to you later. So let's move on to another topic. You remember I said that.
But just if you can like sum up, what is this?
This is basically, this was inspired by Aristotelian logic. Basically, you have things like affirmation, negation, and stuff like that, or universality. These are like the individual lines that you can see here, right? And these are like logical rules of inference. Like if you want to work with logic, you need these rules. All the logic is based on this. Like, for example, the rule that you can say, it's a possibility to say that all cats are carnivores. So it has an abstract structure which says all A's are B's. Like you have this abstract structure in your head, and that's what each of them means. Each of them basically relates to one abstract structure in your head.
So he thought that this describes everything that we have.
This is an exhaustive list, and if you want to understand the universe, that's all you need. Like you can work with it to come up with experience and explain why you are experiencing this and why you are thinking the way you are thinking. Let's move on to something else. And we said earlier that the 18th century is basically the age of enlightenment. One of the things that happened during this era and was very important was the publication of the first important encyclopedia. Diderot came up with this encyclopedia for people to be able to know things. That's what he thought. Like he wanted people to know things. But Kant wants to know can we really know things? Like when I'm talking about an object which is in front of me, can I really know it? His answer is yes and no. You can know the appearance, but you cannot know the thing in itself.
Yeah.
This is how he splits the world into two realms. You have the realm of phenomenon, and you have here Ding and Sich, which is like the thing in itself. And I will explain a bit why he does this and why he needs this crazy idea. Why does he reject knowledge about things in themselves? Kant basically does it so he could make a moral system. Because if you remember, I said that one of the problems people had was that if you have Newtonian mechanics, then there is no room for freedom, right? Because you can explain everything mechanistically, and you can then you should believe in a deterministic system. But if you have the realm of appearances and you have the realm of things in themselves, then you can say that the realm of appearances is deterministic, and that's where the Newtonian rules of mechanics are. But the realm of things in themselves, it's not deterministic. So that's why he does it. So he could build a moral system and have freedom, because there is no freedom in a Newtonian system. And I will tell you how he does it. Sounds very complicated and insane, I know. But basically, this is how he does it, and it's write this down. Like, it's called Transcendental Idealism. It's basically one of the most important concepts in his philosophy. Transcendental Idealism means two things. It means that we can experience only appearances. We cannot have any knowledge about things in themselves. And it also means that space and time are perceived only subjectively through the senses, so they are empirical, right? Things in themselves, they're not temporal or spatial. So therefore, they need not be deterministic. You know where I'm going with this? This is like in this picture, this is the realm of appearances. Right? Can I write here?
Yeah.
So, and plus time and space. So when you have time and space, you basically have Newtonian mechanics, right? Newtonian mechanics, it is applicable in this realm. But here you can say there is no time and space, or as we can say, like, things in themselves are not spatial or temporal. So here, when you talk about, like, for example, I want to make a moral system, and I know that if I want to make a moral system, freedom is very important, because if I'm not free to choose A, then I cannot be morally responsible for it. Freedom is important. That's the first thing. So when I say, I don't know, why did I do something? Why did I do A? If you are in this realm, you're gonna answer that I did A because something came before A that was B, and that B gave rise to A, and B in itself, B in turn was preceded by C, and C caused B, and also it goes ad infinitum, like D caused C, and so on and so on, right? Then there is no freedom, there is no moral responsibility, you cannot have a moral system. Now you take time and space out of this realm, and you save the your moral system. You say that I am morally responsible because something in this realm can cause A, which is in this realm. And there is no time and space here, No cause can precede its effect and stuff like that. Like these rules do not apply. You basically save your moral system.
So how can this influence this?
That's one of the problems with Kantian philosophy. No good answer.
Okay.
No, seriously, like that's one of the problems with it. Like, I'm not joking. There are problems, and that's one of them. But at least you have a moral system.
Because how I was like how I was understanding this before was like very simple, probably. Just basically just that we can never understand the fake thing itself. Like you cannot
Yeah. You cannot say anything about it,
yeah,
but
I
but
cannot
also
say anything about it.
nobody, like, for example, explain normally when they say this, they don't explain why Kant came up with this, and the
Yeah, no
answer
one
is,
I've never
and
heard
that
this.
is the answer, because he wants to have a moral system. That's one
So
of
why
the
the
big
fuck they didn't
answers,
talk about this?
because they don't teach ethics. Like when they talk about Kant at the university, here they don't talk. They don't do it like as an ethical. They're not explaining Kant for his ethics. They just want to
But
tell.
this is like all this is really the reason of all this is that he wanted to have ethical system. That's it.
That's one of the very big reasons. Yeah.
I've never heard this in my life.
Yeah, because if you don't have it, as I said, then you will not have freedom.
Okay.
So you just remember freedom, then you will remember everything.
Wait, I will just give me a minute here.
There are two basic interpretations that people use when they're talking about the thing in themselves and phenomena. And the first interpretation, which is the main interpretation, is called two objects interpretation, and it basically makes a distinction between appearances and thing in themselves. So it means that both of them exist, and both of them exist separately. You have things which are just there, and you have appearances which are also there. Both of them coexist side by side, right? So it's called two objects interpretation because of that. And there is a contradiction here. But this is one of the problems, because Kant himself does not really explain it, how you should interpret his system. So this is one of the contradictions with this interpretation, is that you are saying that you cannot say anything about things in themselves, and you cannot talk about them. But at the same time, you are claiming something about their existence. How would you know that they are there if you cannot make any claims about them? That's one contradiction, which is very beautiful. Or there is another problem, like it can lead to skepticism. Again, like maybe you're just having experiencing these things in your mind, and it's just like a figment of your imagination again. Maybe what you're coming up with does not really, in any way, it just have no relation to reality, like the thing in itself, right? Because you isolate yourself basically in this system. Your mind isolates itself. So there is another interpretation which is different from this one. It's called the two aspects interpretation, which means that there is only one realm, and appearances are different aspects of things in themselves, and there are different perspectives. Like there is the human perspective, which you can, for instance, talk about appearances, and there is also another, I don't know, objective perspective, that things in themselves can look at themselves or something like that. Like we are not able to make any claims about things in themselves, not because it's a different realm that we cannot ever reach, just because we cannot perceive that certain aspects of it. Like for example, the analogy would be like bees can't see ultraviolet light. It's just an aspect of this world. It doesn't mean it's something extra. But we cannot just see it because we don't have that perspective. Like we are not in that situation.
Okay.
We can talk about Kantian ethics if you want. I don't know if you need it or not. But this is like one of the major things in Kant.
No, I think you can tell me.
Okay. When you say Kantian ethics, like the first word that should come into your mind is the word autonomy. You should be autonomous. You should decide for yourself. This is the age of enlightenment, remember. And Kant wrote an essay called What is Enlightenment? And he said like basically enlightenment means thinking for yourself. Sapere aude is the phrase that you should have courage to know. You should have the audacity to know. You need autonomy. And you should be autonomous when it comes to whatever you choose to know. And when you apply it to ethics, autonomy means you should be autonomous in choosing what rules to follow. So it's not like that. It's not like that. It's not like certain rules exist and you just follow them because everybody follows them, and you just have to conform to the norm. You should come up with your own rule, and you're responsible for coming up with that rule. So for Kant, morality is a rational activity. You have scientific activity that springs from understanding, which is in the realm of theoretical philosophy, and it deals with appearances, right? It's the picture you remember from the picture. Where is it? It's not important. It's from the picture you remember. Yeah.
That one.
Yeah.
That we talked about.
Yeah. This is like the realm of theoretical philosophy, right? And your scientific claims and everything happens here. But when you talk about morality, it springs from reason, and it's called practical philosophy. It's in the realm of practical philosophy. So basically, this realm tells you how things are. Like Newtonian mechanics just explains the universe. If you are working within this realm, you're in your practical philosophy. It tells you how things ought to be. So moral philosophy deals with things in themselves. And it's different from like some philosophers that came before it. It's different, for example, from Aristotle, because Aristotle in his ethics talked about eudaimonia. There is a goal, there is a higher goal which is called eudaimonia, and you have to reach it. It's like the pinnacle of happiness that you can reach. And but Kant's morality is not like that. As we explained, freedom is very important in this in Kant's philosophy because of the problem of free will. It doesn't want his system to be deterministic, so it has to work in the realm of the things in themselves. And if you ask Kant, say, hey, Monsieur Kant, why do you think that we are ethical creatures, and why do you think that we need ethics? He basically rationalizes your intuitions. He says that he would say that I have a very strong feeling that there is something called the moral law. So it should exist. That's his only answer. See, he doesn't have a better explanation that I have this very strong feeling inside me that moral laws should exist. Now, just to end the discussion, the very basic thing about his ethics is that you should know what maxims mean and you should know what imperatives are. A maxim is basically a general rule, which, for example, goes like something like to be never upset or to succeed by any means necessary. This is just a general rule which is called a maxim. And in Kantian ethics, you have something called hypothetical imperatives. And it goes something like, if you want to pass your exam, study hard. So it basically tells you that if you wish to reach a certain goal, you should act in a certain way in such and such a case. That's what hypothetical imperatives are. So maxims are basically how one acts. Hypothetical imperatives tells you how one should act. And the last important concept is the concept of categorical imperative. And it's basically tells you that act as if the maxim according to which you are acting would become universal. So what would happen if everybody else acted based on this maxim? So you should universalize your maxim. And there are criticisms, of course, like you can say, if you're a Nazi and you you want to kill a Jew, then you're perfectly fine with it that everybody thought that Jews should be killed. So that's one criticism. Or if you're in the US and you want to own a gun, and if somebody asks you, what if everybody else owned a gun? And they would say it's perfectly fine. Everybody should own a gun. So that's one of the flaws of the argument. That's Kant.
And about this imperative, so that's like the only one that he has?
There are two kinds of imperatives, categorical and hypothetical.
But this one is like the one that comes from the... Yeah, the thing is, because I know everything in Czech, but I don't know how this stuff are in
Say it in Czech.
Did it like comes from čistý praktický rozum?
Yeah, it comes from, yeah.
Okay.
Categorical imperatives, yeah, they come from čistý praktický rozum.
Okay, and the only his explanation for it, why we have this, is that he just has this strong feeling that...
And like Nietzsche makes fun of him, and later philosophers make fun of him, that's not really enough. Basically rationalizing your human feelings.